In any case, start replay buffer. Click to open your notifications. Layout editor. I'm not worried about that. Edit your stream title and description. What did I call this one? Jordan Peterson is back and luck be a landlord. Yes, 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 yes. Okay.
A clinical psychologist, so I do want to. I think for my own life, it's important that I selfishly use this a little bit to get advice from you personally, which I think can help other people as well.
Yes.
I have the new book here, which is called Beyond Order, which I love the title of that. 12 More Rules for Life, which was written. I know a good chunk of this was written before your ordeal, which we can talk about too. And it's so funny on the book. It says the New York Times has called you the most influential public intellectual in the Western world, which is undoubtedly true. It's a tremendous amount of pressure. And do you ever say to yourself, do you ever look at the Western world and go, you know what? I don't want to be the most influential public intellectual. I don't want to be responsible in any way for what's going on.
I would say I vary in that opinion moment to moment every day. I'm in an extremely fortunate position, but it's also a strange position, and it isn't exact.
Okay, so I'm gonna stop him right here. Not for anything to do with him, but if you're still watching right now, this game, the way it functions, you haven't seen this before. Like I said, it's a slot game. Every turn, you are going to, play the slots, so to speak. You're going to pay 1 coin, and every turn you get the option to add another item to your slot machine. And like I said, they'll have different traits, different characteristics, down below, as well as showing you how rare or common, or uncommon an item is, and how much money it will give you each turn. So we have milk. And sometimes, the thing that's interesting about it is that, we have a cat, and cats can consume milk, but it doesn't show you here under the milk that it can be consumed by a cat. So it's like sometimes you have to keep information in your head, and then also be constantly checking your inventory to see what kinds of other potential combos you could have. And then you have the crow here. It gives 2. It's going to give -3 every 4 spins. So ultimately it's going to give you 2, 4, 6, and then on the 4th turn, when you would have 8, it's going to take away 3, so you get 5 coins after every 4 turns effectively, and whatnot. Right now I'm gonna go with the milk because that can give me a quick 9. If it's adjacent to the cat. And the sound, there's usually music with this, but I turned it down so that we could focus on this interview.
Clear to me how to conceptualize it or how to move forward in the position that I'm in. So
so Peterson, it's basically just gonna be him just describing who he is and kind of giving some of the backstory and whatnot. And so that's probably I'll try not to interrupt again. Glad you're still here.
Actively
all right,
working that through.
Now that everything's ready, I can crack open this damn
fame.
beer.
Do you like the adulation of
it's just a
people?
glass,
Because
but
you've helped a tremendous amount of people, and you're very well known. That also comes with obviously a lot of negatives, but there's a ton of positives to it. And have you grown to like them, to like the idea of being famous?
Well, I find it very difficult to accustom myself to. It happened to me quite late in life, and so it's still very strange for me to walk down the street and be recognized continually. Some of it's extremely positive. It's as if I'm always among friends and well-wishers. I mean, you wouldn't get that impression if you looked at my reputation online, let's say, because there's a disproportionate number of journalists who have taken a dislike to me. But when I'm out in public, it's like living in a small town, but everywhere in some sense, but in a small town like that was this subject of a 1950s, romanticized version of a small town where everyone loves each other, and people are always telling me that they're happy to see me walking around and looking healthy, or they just say hello, or they do a thumbs up or yell something out. And so it's like being among friends and well-wishers, except it's more intimate than that. And it's extraordinarily positive, but also very difficult to conceptualize. I was walking with a friend of mine this morning who's a clinical psychologist, and I was talking about this issue and about the impact that my communication has had culturally and at the level of individual lives. And you know, I mentioned to her, and we discussed the fact that so much of this isn't a consequence of my ideas. You know, I read widely, and I read people who were very profound thinkers. Nietzsche and Dostoevsky and Jung, people who know me know that they were great influences on me, but much more widely than that, many neuroscientists and many literary figures. And of course, people like Jung and Nietzsche and Dostoevsky were overwhelmingly influenced by their own reading and their own knowledge, their knowledge of Christianity, the knowledge of our religious traditions. In Jung's case, his psychoanalytic practice and his work with schizophrenics. And I've read much of the major works by all the major clinical psychologists, and I've been able to communicate those ideas, to synthesize them to some degree, and then to communicate them to very large numbers of people. And it's not that surprising the ideas have a profound effect, because they were written by geniuses who were interested in helping people sort out their lives and live more meaningful lives. And so on the one hand, it's not surprising that the ideas have that influence, but on the other, it's difficult, it's complex to be the person who's identified with that to such a great degree.
You're the conduit.
Yes, which is a cliched thing in some sense. You know, artists say that they're just a conduit, but there's truth in that. And people say that I articulate what they already know and that that's helpful. And I believe that to be the case, because otherwise it wouldn't echo and reverberate.
Right. And as powerfully as it does. One of your rules, which I looked at here in the new book.
So one of his works, his first book was called Maps of Meaning, and I'm not too familiar with that one. I think that one was more of like an ode to he has this habit of mixing pseudo-intellectualism in with, you know, different kinds of random statistics or just general information, you know, and mixing it in with his own, you know, values and just, you know, assumptions and his own poetic, you know, flourish and whatnot and imagination, and into, you know, what he believes is very concrete philosophy. And as I've said, it has been seen really as a kind of, he's been seen as like a self-help guru for, you know, largely a lot of young men, a lot of men who tend to be, you know, right-wing or conservative or reactionary. And his second book, which was called 12 Rules for Life, is exactly what it sounds like. He's, you know, full forward into the, you know, or he's gone fully into the self-help, you know, lane, and he has prescribed 12 rules for how people should live their lives, ideal, or how you should get things together. And one of them is to, you know, one of the common jabs that's made at him that kind of summarizes his philosophy is clean your room, because he likes to invoke that you should be cleaning your room as in it's a metaphor for that you should stay focused on your own house or what's going on in your own personal life instead of before trying to change what's out there in the world. And the thing is, he'll be real slippery, because he'll be like, okay, you know, once you say like, oh, what if my room is clean, or what if there's other forces that are keeping me from being able to, you know, keep my house in order or keep my room clean and whatnot. And he likes to dance around that shit. But he has nevertheless has genuinely become one of the most influential, you know, thinkers, you could even say self-help gurus, and just public, you know, intellectuals, public figures, really.
It said, and I want to ask you about this. It says, do not allow yourself to become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. The first part of that, I've witnessed, and I know that you've lived. I've never seen an attack on someone like I've seen on you, and I paid attention. You know, I'm a comedian. I talk about cultural issues. I you know, am relatively well versed in what's going on in the public sphere. I've never seen attempt after attempt after attempt to smear and like besmirch a human being as I saw with you. I mean, there was much less, and I'm serious about this. There was maybe less negative press about Osama bin Laden than you. I mean, I think there was more of like people trying to understand Osama bin Laden. He grew up, and he was disenfranchised, whatever it was. But how do you not, especially because you went through this very powerful ordeal, and I don't know how, and I know that a lot of that was internal family dynamics and your own health and your family's health, but how do you not become resentful against the people that have tried to assassinate your character? Also, do you blame any of them for what you went through recently, which we'll talk about in a little bit, but the ordeal that you went through? Do you blame any of these people? Do you say to yourself, had they not been as aggressive and had they not been as vicious, you might not have been in the situation you were in?
Well, I worked through a lot of the answers to the questions that you're asking while I was writing this second book. The last chapter, the chapter you referred to, do not become resentful, deceitful, or arrogant. Those are the three things that I noticed that were particularly catastrophic to people in my clinical practice. Those three things and their interactions. And then in the final chapter, chapter 12, is be grateful in spite of your suffering. Look, the first thing I'd say is that I've watched people since I've become a public figure. I've watched people, my peers, let's say academics in other places in the world, or people who are roughly my professional peers, who've been the target of attacks on Twitter or in the newspapers in some manner similar to what's happened to me. And my observation has been that it's very, very hard on people. They generally fold up and apologize and are shocked and hurt to a quite deep degree. And so it's no joke to have that happen to you. It's given me more insight into why people are so likely to not say the things they need to say when it's the time to say them, because the trouble that can cause is very difficult to cope with.
Right. So just to remind y'all, because, they're not speaking directly about what the things were that Jordan B. Peterson was being criticized for and, they were trying to get him canceled for, was that, like I said, his claim to fame was in the post-Trump era or immediately before. He was, the main thing that he was challenging was the implementation of a new law it was basically, basically it was declaring that transgender people would be protected under the, same, civil rights statutes as other marginalized groups. Of course, this is in Canada and whatnot. And I think like in the province that Dr. Peterson was in, it was already established. And then it was just starting to become like, like they were actually like, putting the legalese and everything together and saying like, hey, we're officially, doing this or whatnot. And part of that was, him misrepresenting the bill called C-16, saying that basically like, oh, if you misgender a student or something, or don't call them by their preferred pronouns, then you'll be thrown in jail. Now, it's been years, I think at least 5 years since that bill was implemented, and not a single person has been arrested or jailed for it or lost their job for it, because that's not what it was about. It was just about basically saying that like, hey, transgender people have the same protections that, indigenous people or women's or disabled people or any other marginalized group. And that you cannot, purposefully treat them a certain way because of their identity, or you will face repercussions. And he just basically stood up and said, hey, you know what, and there's a clip of this, maybe I'll go and find it, but he basically says that, if they tell me to do it, no, I won't. And if, whatever, if they tell me to pay a fine, I'm not going to do it. And if they tell me that, to go to jail, I'm going to go on a hunger strike. He's like, I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to fold and whatnot. And so that has been, and then other views that he's expressed about women and their sexuality and whatnot. Also the, nature of hierarchies in human society. And he often has he often has lobster. He's also connected with a lot of lobster imagery because he likes to make very basic, unscientific observations about the similarities between the delicious little crustacean rats that we call lobsters and human society, which is far more complex, and human beings are far more, saying complicated creatures. But he likes to make very shallow comparisons, and like I said, with a lot of poetic flourish and a lot of allusions to literature and to philosophy and religion, he makes it come off to some people that it is a concrete fact about life. So continue on. But that's basically what he has been, quote unquote, canceled for. It's basically him expressing a lot of his shitty views, being bold and standing 10 toes down in them, and people, pushing back and telling him why he's wrong and whatnot.
So I certainly wouldn't say that it's been without effect. It's also a great mystery to me that it continually happens. I continually expect it to stop, right, but it doesn't stop, and it's hard to understand why that is exactly. I'm trying to understand that all the time. I think to some degree there's a public attempt to understand that even, and I say that because I'm also the subject of an inordinate number of memes, right, and they represent who people think I am in a very large number of ways, strange ways. I've become very associated with lobster imagery and with frog imagery and with king imagery and with, well, the Red Skull imagery. And it's a very complex set of images. And so that all adds to the difficulty of sorting it out as far as I'm concerned. I certainly was tempted towards bitterness and resentment as a consequence of my illness, which created a tremendous amount of pain. And well, at the same time, or approximately the same time, my daughter and my wife were also very ill. And so it's difficult not to succumb to the temptation to shake your fist at God and curse the clouds and the thunder and the structure of being itself for right, all the suffering that people go through. But it's not helpful. And I've really strived, and with the help primarily of my wife, but also of other people close to me, to identify resentful and bitter thoughts and to eradicate them, because they're not helpful. They're not justifiable, like under any condition, as far as I can tell. And that's why I tried to illustrate in chapter 12 that gratitude is most properly conceptualized, if it's not naive, as a form of courage. It's sort of like the decision you take when you decide to get married. The trope is that you find the right person and then you just know. But the truth of the matter is that you decide, and then you continually keep deciding day after day while you're living with the person. And gratitude in the face of life's suffering is the same thing. It's a decision about an attitude that you are going to strive to bring forward. It isn't so much a considered opinion about the benevolence or lack thereof of the world. Right. So, and I just couldn't see when I delved into my thoughts. I thought, this seems unfair. My family is struggling under a tremendous burden of ill health. Not that. So
real quick, he's going on about his, he's generally alluding to some of the troubles that they've been going through in their family with different sickness. He's going to talk about his brief drug addiction, even though he won't exactly call it that because they're really weaselly. But let me real quick go into this clip of him misrepresenting that C-16 bill that I mentioned earlier. And you can even see in the banner down here, it's talking about genders, rights, and freedom of speech, and free speech versus social justice. And that's always the calling card that they like to use. And this is from 2016. So, right around the beginning of the Trumpian era. And yeah, it's basically, I'm not doing this and that's that. He'll go on a hunger strike if jailed over the trans bill. It's about 90 seconds, so let's go and play it.
Prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that. Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this, and that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. Now, if our society comes to some sort of consensus over the next while about how we'll solve the pronoun problem, let's call it, and that becomes part of popular parlance, and it seems to solve the problem properly without sacrificing the distinction between singular and plural, and without requiring me to memorize an impossible list of an indefinite number of pronouns, then I would be willing to reconsider my position. But I'm also partly opposed to this because it's been made mandatory and has the whole weight of the law behind it. It's like, this is a very bad idea. I believe this is a very bad idea. And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization.
So you see how many, I don't know if you caught all that, his way or the highway type of attitude. And here's the thing again about like specific what he was saying is that first of all, he's obviously saying that like outright, oh, I'm just not going to use speech that you don't want me, that I don't want to use. That's that. And all, blah, 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 blah. And then he goes on to say and frame it as, oh, the pronoun problem, and if I have to memorize an impossible list and whatnot. He's playing off of this like short-lived thing that happened. I don't know if it was from damn it, what's that one page? But basically the whole thing with like Facebook had the option of making like dozens and dozens of genders. I don't know if that was like a troll or somebody was, there had to have been a troll or somebody who was just really being obnoxious. But for the most part, it's like, no, most of the time people just want you to either call them she, he, or them, or they, right? It's really not that big of a list. No more difficult than, learning to refer to somebody as, oh, doctor this, professor that. They're a lawyer. They're, with a yes, your honor, or yes, officer, or whatever the fuck, right? Any other ways in which we recognize different people's titles and whatnot. This is just his, saying react, so this is, his reaction to being able to, having to address people in a certain way. But also there's a reactionary disgust that he has because he's like, this is something that hits at the fabric of our country and our values and everything, and then describes it as like, well, we need to wait for a consensus to need to come out about it, but then at the same time says that this has the full force of the law and that it's creating a lot of commotion and whatnot. It's because of people like him, because there has been a decision made. If it has the full force of the law and it has a lot of social and cultural support, that means a consensus has been made that we're changing, that the time for ignoring trans people and not taking them seriously, not taking their arguments and their their lifestyle and their truth and their testimony seriously, is what I'm saying? It's that contradiction. He wants to downplay it as if it's not that important, but also it's like, no, at the very stake of our country and our values, the fabric is being torn apart in front of us, type of person. And that's where like the reactionary far right elements come into play. Because this is beyond just, not understanding the issue or just being about like compelled speech and everything. This hits deeper at his, aversion to, saying gender dysphoria, transgenderism, and, many other issues, So now that that's out the way, back to this.
That's not true of many, many families. I'm very aware of that. And at the same time, this, in some sense, rather unique exposure to continual public pillorying, if that's a word, it probably isn't. But when I delved into it, identified all the thoughts and thought them through, I couldn't see any positive utility. They weren't helping me in any way. So, and I've done a reasonable job of dispensing with them in the last 2 months. I would say at the same time, however, I've also been recovering to a fair degree since I've been properly diagnosed finally.
Now, what was that proper diagnosis for the people that aren't aware of what you went through? Because I know that there was a lot of speculation because there was really no information out there when you kind of disappeared from public life. Yeah.
It's still not exactly clear what happened to me. I've had a long history of depression, and that definitely has played a role in predisposing me to whatever happened over the last few years. But my new physician, I was particularly suffering in the mornings. And by the end of the day, I was back to something approximating normal, but it would take me like 8 hours or so of real effort to even get to the point where I could stand up and move forward without excruciating pain, without believing that I was going to collapse. And then that would recur every morning. Well, he investigated the structure of my sleep and found that I had severe central sleep apnea, and I was waking up 25 times an hour or so. And those are stressful occurrences where you stop breathing. And so I've been using a breathing machine for the last month, and it's improved me from about 5% of function to about 50 or 60%. And I'm still seem to be improving, at least to some degree. And so apparently I was wearing this ring that monitors sleep, and I was getting 0 deep sleep, maybe 1 minute or 2 minutes a night, which is nowhere near enough.
No.
And since I've been using the machine, it's up to more like 30 to 50 minutes. That's where your body restores itself completely, is during deep sleep. And so at least one of the problems that I was facing, it's not the only one, but at least one of them was chronic lack of sleep.
And I know that you had anxiety, and then you were having bouts of anxiety. You had your wife's illness and Michaela's surgery, and you're having bouts of anxiety, and then you're taking, a doctor prescribed benzodiazepines to try to deal with that, and you keep upping the dosage of that, and then you're having an atypical reaction to the medication, where you're having
both to the medication. Yeah, well, I started taking it in 2017. I had a pronounced episode of insomnia, and it lasted for a long time, about 3 weeks. I had very little sleep. People have, I said, I think on Joe Rogan, that I didn't sleep for 21 days, and the cynics have pointed out that the world record for sleeplessness is 11 days. But there's a big difference between trying to stay awake, which is what you're doing when you're trying to break a record, and being unable to sleep. Those are.
And I mean, we're only 15 minutes in, and I mean, this dude's just a little weasel. Like I mentioned before, is that he is trying to dance around mentioning the. Now, I'm not saying that this dude isn't, really distressed in life, that he doesn't really have all these physical ailments and mental anguish that he's describing, but he's beating around the bush quite a bit, because as mentioned before, he's like, oh, all the pressure of being a star and being, not him, but like, Tim Dillon was asking, how's it, being such a, large public figure and getting all this attention and whatnot. Remember how he got this attention? He got it by being an open reactionary and saying that he's not going to respect, an entire wave of the culture of society. You know what I'm saying? In the culture war, he took a specific side in the culture war, and part of what comes with that, when you establish yourself as a warrior in this stuff, is you're gonna, have the stress and anxieties of a warrior. Some of this shit was self-induced, and he's making, Tim Dillon asked him, okay, what was exactly your diagnosis? Because he's been talking about all these different ailments for a couple years now, and it's not just one thing. He's not just talking about suffering from one thing. It seems to be a mixture of a bunch of different shit. And, he's the clinical psychologist. I'm not going to pretend to sit here and know more, but, than him, or that, yeah, he's suffering from this thing and not that thing. But he's just so weaselly with it. And then also you're going to see later on is that when he goes deeper into what really was his drug addiction, he doesn't refer to it as that. He tries to, again, dance around it. But it's exactly what it is. And he's going to make some decisions that, as a seasoned clinical psychologist, he should not be making. He's far too experienced. He's dealt with these different situations, and he is going to try to coax some empathy for himself that he doesn't really allow, that he doesn't allow for other people, such as transgender people, or from some other comments that he's made before, even other people who are addicted to drugs.
The same thing at all. And perhaps I was micro sleeping when I was laying down, but my subjective experience was 3 weeks without any sleep at all.
Bullshit.
And I had all sorts of other
That's
symptoms
cap.
that were quite mysterious. I would faint when I stood up, and chronically, and I was ice cold. I couldn't get warm no matter how many blankets I piled on.
Was this, do
among
you think
other
any
symptoms.
of this had to do with your
Stress?
Well, stress certainly, but like you start
Yes.
these medications in 2017. Had these things happened prior to you taking the medications?
Well, it's complicated because I had a history of depression as well, and I stopped taking antidepressants in early 2016, and that seemed to be going quite well. But and I have an autoimmune disorder, so
And what is that?
it's
Is it
complicated.
like an autoimmune disorder is just. I know that examples of that are like lupus or something like that.
Yeah.
Is it a it's a what type of disorder is it? I know that your diet.
Well, I haven't had arthritic symptoms, but
Okay.
I had psoriasis, quite marked, and a chronic history of mouth ulcers and peripheral uveitis in my right eye, which is an inflammatory condition in the retina. And I had I can't remember the name of it. It's your hair follicles are attacked by your immune system, and sometimes people go completely bald. They lose all their hair. I don't remember the name. Alopecia. I had alopecia as well.
And is this why you have the diet that you have? Because I remember you said that the diet you have has alleviated some of those symptoms.
Right.
Yeah, well, both my wife and I have autoimmune problems, and so does my daughter, although my son doesn't. And my daughter's very severe arthritis was ameliorated to a tremendous degree by a meat-only diet, which she's maintained for 5 years. And so both my wife and I, while we're still on that diet, both of us are still on that diet, which I wouldn't casually recommend to anyone, by the way. It's very restrictive. It's very hard on my social life. It makes it very difficult to travel or to go out. But it does seem to keep these symptoms essentially under control.
Now, were you diagnosed when you and your wife, you both have this disorder? Do you have similar disorders, or is her disorder?
Hers is more severe than mine.
And you were diagnosed with that when you were younger, or did that come on later in life?
Well, it was diagnosed mostly this year.
Okay.
I mean, these other sort of symptomatic conditions,
Sure.
uveitis, and so on, they were diagnosed as they arose. But this year, I was subject to a lot of medical tests, and I had various blood markers of autoimmune trouble.
Now, at any time did you become addicted to the benzodiazepines?
Well, not in that I was craving them, and not in that I was seeking them out or searching for them. Yes, in that I was dependent on them.
Okay.
So if I stopped taking them, I would undergo withdrawal. And
Yes. Did you just hear this motherfucker? Did you just hear him? Tim Dillon asked him straight up. I'm going to just play it again. But listen how weaselly this motherfucker is. He's going to ask him straight up, were you addicted to benzos? And he's going to say, well, I wasn't, addicted, but I was, dependent in that when I didn't take them, I would, suffer withdrawals. Motherfucker, you were addicted then. From the addiction came the dependency. And when that dependency wasn't being fed, you suffered withdrawals. That's how it goes.
Well, it was diagnosed mostly this year.
Okay.
I mean, these other sort of symptomatic conditions,
Sure.
uveitis, and so on, they were diagnosed as they arose. But this year, I was subject to a lot of medical tests, and I had various blood markers of autoimmune trouble.
Now, at any time did you become addicted to the benzodiazepines?
Well, not in that I was craving them, and not in that I was seeking them out or searching for them. Yes, in that I was dependent on them.
Okay.
So if I stopped taking them, I would undergo withdrawal. And that really, when I stopped taking them, which I did in 2019, once I realized their danger to me,
Sure.
Some people don't seem to respond negatively to them, but I certainly did. I stopped taking them, and that was catastrophic.
Do you have any other great
catastrophe.
deeper insights about addiction having gone through this experience?
Well, I wouldn't recommend it. I mean, look, lots of psychiatric drugs are helpful to people, And
It's
but
a
everything
mess.
that's helpful comes with a risk. And I mean, antidepressants helped me a lot. And the benzodiazepine, when I first took it, stopped my insomnia instantly, which is partly why I kept taking it. There were a lot of stressful things going on in my life at that time, and I felt, especially because I had stopped taking the antidepressants, that once I took the benzodiazepine and I'd settled back down a bit, that I would just leave well enough alone. And I just, so I kept taking it. It was prescribed to me. I didn't know at that point that a small proportion of people, we don't know how small, have a catastrophic dependency response. So they can't get off the medications without suffering catastrophic side effects. And I was in that category. So
Yeah, and then
You're a clinical psychologist. You would think that, first of all, you would already have an understanding of your response to different drugs, to, what you're allergic to, all that shit. And especially because, again, you're a clinical psychologist and you're supposed to be well seasoned. You're supposed to have been dealing with these type of situations for decades. And knowing that, that if I'm being prescribed this thing and you're not already well aware of it, which I find hard to believe, then you need to become aware of it and do due diligence so that way you don't end up in the situation that you got yourself in. And that's what's so annoying about this thing, is because a lot of people will be like, oh, you're just being harsh on him. You're just shitting on him because he's conservative right wing. It's like, no, it's because the way he talks about stuff is so weaselly and so around beating around the bush. And he does not offer an ounce of nuance or complexity or empathy for others, especially if they are of liberal or left-wing persuasions. But himself, he is trying to frame everything as, oh, was I addicted? No, I wasn't craving them. I wasn't, seeking them out. But when I didn't, get my fix, I would suffer withdrawals and shit. It's just like, dude, you're full of shit. And also the way in which he alluded to, like, all the stress of, the situation. I already went over that, but it's just like, ugh. It's so easy for him to get under your skin if in the history of his actions and what he's done so far with his career.
went to, I believe, Moscow, and you were put in a medically induced coma to help you detox from the medication?
Well, there was a variety of reasons, but that was the primary reason, yes, to get through the worst of the withdrawal. And after that happened, I haven't taken any benzodiazepines since then.
And when you woke up...
But I was still suffering terribly from the withdrawal effects.
Still?
Eventually.
Even after the detox?
Well, yes. Essentially, yes.
So, I mean, these are... Now, benzodiazepines, these are drugs that are like... Would Xanax be considered? Yes. Okay, so in that family of drugs.
Yes, alcohol, barbiturates, and benzodiazepines are all anti-anxiety agents.
Right.
Alcohol is more complex, but they're all in the same family.
And I know that people have to medically detox from alcohol as well at a certain
Yes,
point.
alcohol withdrawal often kills people.
Yeah.
Often.
Yeah.
And they use Xanax, they use benzodiazepines to reduce the risk of seizure when people withdraw from alcohol.
Right.
Yeah.
And now waking up in Moscow, which is like the chilling, why? And I've heard a little bit about this, but you said you felt that your family made the decision to move you to Moscow because they felt the treatment there would be better than Canada or the U.S.?
Well, the treatments that I had in Canada and the U.S. weren't working.
Right. Okay.
So it was a last-ditch attempt. It was a high-risk last-ditch attempt.
Yeah.
Nobody did it lightly or carelessly. It was
Right.
just we felt we were out of options, and I believe that to be the case.
Right. And what was the treatment in Moscow other than the medically induced coma? What else would you say? Like, how it was the experience? I mean, obviously it wasn't a positive one, but in terms of the doctors and the hospital and the place that you were in, you felt that you were well taken care of.
They did their best.
Yeah.
And all the people, medical professionals that I dealt with, generally speaking, did their best. And it's hard to tell what the effect of that was, net positive or net negative. I'm still alive.
Right. Which is the positive.
You roll the dice and take your chances, and there's nothing certain. When my wife was treated for her cancer, which was fatal, a fatal form of cancer in virtually 100% of the conditions of the cases noted. It's very rare, thankfully. She had quite a radical second surgery and then suffered terrible complications from that surgery for 6 months. They're life-threatening complications. But it saved her life.
Yeah.
So, the cure has danger just like the disease.
And your diet is very important, because I remember that you were saying on Joe Rogan that you had like an apple juice and had such an adverse reaction to it just because it contained sugar, which you had not had in years.
No, sulfites, actually.
So,
we thought. It's very unclear. All of this is very unclear still.
Yeah, it's very interesting. How ready are you to get back to your schedule? I mean, you had a crazy...
Well, I am.
Yeah.
I am, in some sense, back to my schedule, as much as my health will allow. I'm working from 3 o'clock. Well, I do some work before that. I spend most of the morning walking and exercising, and some in correspondence, but I'm recording two to three podcasts on my end a week, and I'm generally on 2 others during the week, and I'm writing again. So, I'm champing at the bit. It's possible that I'll tour again, depending on whether or not I can tolerate it. That time changes and all of that.
Right, and then of course with COVID, that's a whole
Well,
other
yes,
thing.
there's that too.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, we are talking to Dr. Jordan Peterson this episode, and we're having a great talk with him. And one of the things that Jordan has advocated is getting your puss smashed up. And in order to fuck a good puss, you gotta have Blue Chew, because it makes your dick hard. Blue Chew is a unique online service that I've read this so many times. You know what it is. You know what Blue Chew is. It's a unique online service. It's the same ingredients as Viagra and Cialis, but it's in a chewable form, and it's cheaper.
Mm-hmm.
You take it, it makes your penis hard.
Mm-hmm.
Then you last longer. That's what it is. I mean, that's what it is. It's a dick pill. And you should get it. If you try it, you can try it for free if you use the promo code TD at checkout. Just pay $5 shipping. That's BlueChew.com, promo code TD, and receive your first month free. And we thank Blue Chew for sponsoring us. It's so important. It's chewable. Did you know that?
Really? Because I don't like swallowing pills.
You like swallowing cock. You walked into that. The process is simple. Do you know how simple it is?
How simple?
You go to BlueChew.com. You consult with one of their licensed medical providers. And once you're approved, you'll receive your prescription within days. The best part, do you know what it is?
What's that?
It's all done online. You don't have to go and you don't have to tell a doctor you have a soft penis. But what if you did? Would it make you a better person? If you had to go to the doctor and say, I cannot get my cock hard. Maybe that's something that people need to go through. And we're depriving them of that by doing this online. If you had to walk into a doctor and go, my penis will not get hard. And the doctor judges you. Is that what people think doctors do, by the way? They judge you? Doctor's like, what? You think that's the way a doctor would react? So my doc, my penis.
What kind of dick is that?
Yeah, I thought so. Like a doctor would just be like, all right, take this pill. That's all it would be.
Your little
But it's
dick
better
shrimp.
to do it online.
Your little shrimp dick.
My friend
Take this prescription, make your life a little better.
started taking Blue Chew religiously, and he started performing much better in bed. Blue Chew's tablets are made in the USA, and they prepare and ship direct.
Shit.
Go to BlueChew.com, promo code TD to receive your first month free. BetterHelp, H-E-L-P. It's an online counseling service. It's really good. communicate with a counselor in under 48 hours. It's not a crisis line, not self-help. Broad range of expertise available, which may not be locally available in many areas. It's available for clients worldwide. Log into your account at any time. Send a message to your counselor. Timely and thoughtful responses. Plus, you can schedule a weekly video and or phone sessions. You won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room as with traditional therapy. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. It's really great. You know, people that use this are happy. BetterHelp, H-E-L-P. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health with the help of an experienced professional. In fact, so many people have been using BetterHelp, they're recruiting additional counselors in all 50 states. The service is available. If you need it, you want it, you can log in, start going, tell them what you think, and they themselves will help you. If you don't really vibe with your counselor, just get another one. It's not a big deal.
All right.
So many people are taking charge of their mental health. This podcast is sponsored by BetterHelp and Tim Dillon Show listeners. Get 10% off your first month at BetterHelp.com/TimD. BetterHelp.com/TimD. And just to ask you about that, because you are a doctor. I mean, I know you're a psychologist, but when you look at
Sort of like a doctor.
yeah, it's like a psychologist. I've said negative things about psychologists, but not per se the discipline, but not the person that my thing is whenever I talk to someone and I say, what are you majoring in college? And they say psychology, it's generally a person I'd never want any advice from. And that's anecdotal evidence. That's not backed up by any data. It's just like when I say, what are you majoring in? And someone says business, I go, I would never want to do business with you. It's just it's a very general thing that a lot of people major in, and a lot of people I feel like don't come out of that in a smart way. But as a doctor, what do you
And this is coming from a dude now Tim Dillon is brilliant in his own ways, but this is coming from a dude who, repressed in his sexuality for a long time, hit that with a lot of drug abuse, was involved in, a bunch of different scams, and this is the things that he's told us, right? Lived a very scummy lifestyle, very low achieving, and, just being kind of a grifter and a smoke and mirrors type of guy. And he's managed to find success in this later part of his career as a comedian and whatnot, which is already considered like a place. And this is also something else that he said, a culture, a subculture that is for losers or the people who are, just two or maybe just one, bad day away from just being in the streets and being, having a mental breakdown. And so, just to give a little more insights on who he is and where his perspective is coming from.
think about COVID? I mean, in psychologically, what it's done to people, the lockdowns, the fear, obviously the fear of getting sick and then losing income. What is going to be the sum total effect, in your estimation, of this entire period on the psychology of the world and, more particularly this country? Like, we have a rash of shootings now that, we've always had, but now it seems like these numbers are high even for America. How do we come out of this, do you think?
Well, I've been struck positively in the main by how resilient our social structures and our economic structures have been in the face of this. We've been locked down in an unprecedented way for more than a year, and yet most businesses are still functioning and the social order has been almost completely maintained. And with any luck, we're almost out of it. In the US, I think you guys are up to something like it's close to 35% of the population that's been inoculated now, and that should start to make a real difference really quick. We're a bit behind in Canada, partly because we don't make our own vaccines, and so we've been dependent on supplies from other countries. And so I guess to some degree, I'm surprised by our resilience in the face of this, social and economic. It's a remarkable thing that the vaccines were developed and distributed within the span of a year that there's so many vaccines that they seem to be working, that they're not producing catastrophic side effects. So I think that's all extraordinarily positive, all things considered. I think the signs of instability that are particularly evident in the US are attributable to factors other than COVID and the COVID lockdown that have been brewing for a long time, which I've been talking about, and many other people as well, for a long time.
Right. There are a rash of shootings that have been happening, school shootings, and one of my biggest disappointments is that all of these shootings are done primarily by men, and it feels like it's another thing that women have been kept out of, like, STEM. Is there a way?
That's a terrible joke.
It is a terrible joke, but it's true. And so, why are so many men being driven to violence?
Well, it's not so many. I mean, the school shooters are a tiny, infinitesimal percentage of the population.
And, one of the reasons why he's saying this and framing it like this is because anybody who's been paying attention knows that the perpetrators of these mass shootings has overwhelmingly been white, male, and usually far right or right wing, usually somebody who shares in the point of view, the perspectives that Jordan Peterson has, in that they don't like feminism, they don't like the fact that black people and brown people and people of color, that their plights and our stories are being highlighted more. They don't like, they don't like, political correctness. They don't like, gay people, trans people, all of those things. And so he has to, and the thing is that he has, I don't know if any of these shooters have specifically cited Jordan Peterson as an inspiration. But as a matter of fact, why am I sitting here acting like I don't have the world's information at my fucking fingertips? Let's look it up right now. Mass shooter inspired by Jordan Peterson. Another mass shooting. The shadow of Jordan Peterson beyond order. The first few mass shootings. Let's look at this one. What does this one have to say? Let's go down this a little bit. Feminist violence, biggest thing makes a bigger one. Mass shooters are not disproportionately white. White. Interesting. Okay, hold on a second. It's not crisis movie. It's male power. This account class, culture, history. Huh. All right, so let's look at this one from Jordan Peterson's, from where Jordan Peterson's from, Toronto, Canada. So there was a Toronto van attack, was a suspect who was obsessed with rejection from women. He is not alone among violent men. The suspect in the fatal van attack in Toronto, and this is from 2018, April 25th, wrote a Facebook post highlighting his violent misogynistic tendencies prior to running down pedestrians on a walkway on Monday. Alec Manayasin, who was 25 at the time, he's now 27, I'm guessing, was charged with first-degree murder in the deaths of 10 pedestrians after he plowed through a walkway. Most of his victims were women. While authorities have not yet announced a motive, police said Manayasin posted a cryptic message on Facebook indicating he was part of the incel community, or an online group of involuntary celibate men who blame women for rejecting them. Let's see if Jordan Peterson's name comes up. Okay, so his name is not coming up in this. Let's see if Ben Shapiro. Okay, so maybe the names, maybe he doesn't come up in those. Let's see if there's another one. The Daily Signal. This one's from April 2021. Another mass shooting and questions that still go unanswered. Cal Thomas. The first question is, at the FedEx facility in Indianapolis, in which a 19-year-old male murdered 8 people before taking his own life, is how did he get the gun? So how did he legally purchase 2 guns last summer? So this is a good incident to talk about, but I'm specifically trying to look for Peterson here. Okay, well, you know what? It doesn't look like that there are. Feminist philosopher explains Jordan Peterson's biggest mistake makes a bigger one. I guess this one is more of like a defense of Peterson and how this one journalist called out maybe something he was doing wrong, but that Mann points to Peterson's analysis of mass shootings in general and school shootings in particular, which he says are caused by a kind of social angst or crisis of being. I don't find Peterson's explanation particularly convincing, though existential angst is a broad enough diagnosis that I suppose it could be correct in some fairly useless and non-falsifiable sense. By blaming this angst, she writes, Peterson takes on a huge burden of explaining why white women, people of color, non-binary, blah, 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 almost never act on our existential angst and despair in this way because, as you know, the vast majority of school shooters are white men. Yes, most mass killers are white, but white people represent 3/4 of the U.S. population. If anything, mass killers are disproportionately non-white. And reason they're a right-wing libertarian, mag, they are going to, again, try to underplay this shit immediately by saying that, like, oh, white people are actually 3/4 of the U.S. population, and be like, well, therefore, if it actually was on a per capita basis, there would be more white people that are doing it. But that's skirting around the fact that overwhelmingly, most of the people who commit these fucking crimes, you know what I'm saying, are you know what I'm saying? and the other key, most of the things, people that commit these crimes are usually disaffected, disgruntled white men. And the thing that separates this from the other type of violence that they're alluding to is that most of the other violence in these other groups is in the same in-group. So most black people are attacking and killing other black people. Same thing for different Asian groups. Same thing for different Latin groups. But when it comes to white people, they overwhelmingly will be able to dispense violence on any other group, which may include or not include other white men. But oftentimes, especially in the cases that we've seen in the last several years, are on marginalized groups, people of color, LGBT people, women, religious minorities, etc. So there's no killers, no mass shooters that have cited Jordan B. Peterson, because sometimes a lot of them do leave manifestos or they'll show who they were listening to. And like Ben Shapiro, he's been often cited by at least 2 mass shooters in the last several years. But in any case, let's get back to Jordan Peterson. And he's talking about the angst in young men and why they're so prone to these outlandish acts of violence.
And so it's very difficult to formulate a policy to deal with such things because they are, in fact, so rare and so unpredictable. Aggression per se has its uses. Males are disproportionately violent compared to females, or at least with regards to physical violence. Females have their own particular brand of aggression, which has more to do with reputation destruction than physical violence, and that starts very early.
Yes.
You can detect that in children. And you have a very, very large country.
Right.
330 million people. It doesn't, one person in a million is pretty seriously disturbed. And so that's a shooting a day if it's one person in a million. And you don't have a shooting a day. So it's less than 1 in a million. So it's very, very rare. And thank God.
No, mother, what this be? Oh. It's not rare because the United States has such a disproportionate amount of guns. We have, I think, more than one, almost 2 guns. I don't think it's 2 guns. I think it's like 1.5 or 1 1/3. Basically, every person can own a gun and then some on average. On average, there are enough guns in this country for every single citizen or resident, I should say, to have at least 1 gun and probably 2 if we would just distribute all the available guns and ammunition evenly. Overwhelmingly, they're disgruntled white men. I'm going to keep repeating that point because it needs to be said. But also, again, this playing around with statistics and whatnot, when you can look at modern nations, other developed industrialized nations, whether it's parts of Europe or Australia or even China, Japan, India, different African countries, different Latin countries, whom they have impoverished peoples. They have a lot of guns and drugs. They have a lot of, all of these other indicators for social violence and whatnot. And yet we far exceed them. And it's not a matter of population. It's not a matter of it's not even really a matter of just the guns themselves, because the guns have been here. What's changed is the explanations for why people's lives are shit, for why people are suffering, right? And when you are taught that the issues in your life are primarily caused by when the oh, what's going on? What's good? What's good? Sharta Blot. How you doing? Thanks for stopping in. Do I know you, or is this or did you just happen to find my feed? Right now, I'm going over this interview that Tim Dillon, a comedian, did. I'm just cruising. Oh, that's what's up. I don't know if you know who Jordan Peterson is, or Tim Dillon. Jordan B. Peterson. He's a psychologist, and he's made his name by being very anti-trans and having some very conservative views on women and, say different religious minorities and shit like that and everything. And then Tim Dillon is a comedian. I have this weird rant to share with regards to race relations. Interesting. And why is it that you want to come here to share it? Why is it you feel that this is the place to share? Jordan Peterson is not anti-trans. Oh, he most definitely is. He most definitely is. We were just talking about Bill C-16. Yeah, he definitely is. I have this really weird rant to share with regard to race relations. What is it going to be, 1350, or is it going to be about? Is it going to be about how blacks and whites would be more than happy to live separate from one another? That just as many blacks want it. Oh, okay, interesting. No, Jordan Peterson is definitely anti-trans. I mean, when the C-16 bill was coming up, he basically said that I don't want to have to address people by their pronouns. This is infringement on free speech. If I get fined, if I get you know what I'm saying, if I have to go to jail or whatever, go on a hunger strike and blah, 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 blah. I mean, all of that's just so you don't have to address somebody by a certain pronoun, and making it seem as if it is going to tear at the, saying fabric of quote unquote, Western values, Western civilization. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. In my country, there's a phenomenon of people from one race torching cars belonging to people from another race and putting it on TikTok. Okay. A couple of guys were beaten up too. Okay. That shit's fucked up. Then there were a couple of demonstrations. What country are you from? Charterblatt? Or I guess what country are you residing in? I guess I should say. I'm from Israel. Okay. Right, and then continue on from after. Then there were a couple of demonstrations. So the ruling party in Gaza also chimed in with some rockets. Mm-hmm. Ooh, I'm doing good on making rent each month here. Boom, 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 boom. Did I lose a bunch? Did I lose some units? And now we have some nationalistic extremists putting up a pushback with some torch cars and trashed houses on TikTok. Yeah, it's fucked up, man. So that's fucked up. Yeah, no, I mean that's absolutely fucked up, and I don't know what has been of course Israel, we know the issues going on between that and and Palestine and whatnot, and other neighboring nations and everything. I mean, to me, this doesn't really sound so much like a rant about about race. It's just more about the social unrest that's been going on, and this happens to be another wave of it. What I would be careful of, though, is that I'm somebody that has been following the situation as long as I've been interested in politics, and oh man. So I guess exactly was there like a question you wanted to ask, or was it just you just wanted to mention that? Because unfortunately, yeah, there has been a long history of unrest and tense relations between different groups in Israel. I guess the only thing I would say to that is, Israel has a right to exist, but so does. I just wanted to vent. It's fucked up. Yeah, it is absolutely. All I would say to that is, whole things become peaceful. I think the best way to finding peace is a two-state solution, and the recognition of Palestinians and Palestine as being a sovereign nation, and allowing them to be able to enjoy the same rights and privileges as Israeli folks. A lot of the social unrest stems from the fact that a lot of Palestinians were in the territory that is considered saying Israel to this day, and that I got one more turn to do that. Probably not. I'm not gonna get 100 and something. I mean, it's like a bunch of morons on TikTok thinking beating up other people and putting it on video is entertainment. Oh yeah, of course, absolutely. I mean, this, and again, it's the result of, it's so many different, things. It's like, yeah, you can be part of a marginalized group and then still, take things too far and still be inspired by people whom, like Hamas and everything. They're still willing to use their own people to a certain degree as fodder, if it allows them to antagonize Israel, and provoke, a response, and sometimes allow them to play victim. At the same time, they are genuinely victims in many respects. And, the memory of, them being, kicked off of land that was, that is claimed to be owned by other people, creates a lot of, inevitably creates a lot of, unrest. And then of course you have the worst elements of society, being able to, express themselves online, and online, the internet and everything is social media is really about, not that online media is about, hatred and dumb shit, but that is the stuff what catches on, the most is negative stuff. So no, yeah, I mean, I hear you, it's fucked up. All I can say to that is that, I think Israel deserves, Israel has a right to exist, and so does Palestine, and that's, the best, to me, from what I understand, the best path forward and, reconciling these issues is for them both to be recognized as, as, just human beings, and entitled to, the same resources, the same rights and privileges, as one another. In this case, the Palestinians deserving all the same rights and privileges and autonomy as, Israelis. So, but I appreciate you sharing that with us. I'm going to get back to this Jordan Peterson interview.
For that.
It is when you look at the numbers like that, but it does feel it's too much, right? I'm sure that, when we look at across the world at other countries that don't have these things, is any of this attributable to the fact that men now, and women as well too, but since we're on the topic of men, are retreating more into the digital world, that they are less socialized, that they are more into, potentially, not to blame video games, but people seem to be retreating from the types of social structures that men had participated in for years, which was marriage, family, owning property, things like that. And it seems like a lot of men are not doing those things, or doing those things much later in life. And there seems to be, and you've addressed this, I think, as effectively as anyone, there seems to be a tendency of those men that are not participating in those social structures to feel alienated and disenfranchised, and that often leads to negative pathologies. How do you encourage the type of social commitments that point men in the right direction? And I think you're a big proponent of the more traditional way of life, where it's, forming a bond with someone, getting married, trying to,
Sorry about that.
create and manifest the life you want. That's a lot of the things that you've read and you've talked about involve that. Do you see the digital sphere as being a real problem here because people can escape into that?
I don't see the digital sphere as a problem, not as such. I think pornography might be a problem.
Well, that's the digital sphere.
Well, fair enough, but
Right on these nuts.
decompose the digital sphere into its various aspects, and then look at
Well, you're original at least. I haven't heard that one yet.
the ease of access of pornography.
Bussy
and its
muncher.
proliferation. I think that's not a good thing. I think there are many good things about the digital sphere. I mean, there are large communities of encouragement that have popped up on YouTube. I suppose I am at the head of one, but there are many people doing similar things. Like Jocko Willink is a good example, and your question was, I guess, two-part. You commented that there's perhaps a disproportionate number of people who are feeling alienated from the general community, from life itself, from the social world, from the natural world, for that matter, and that alienated, isolated, and lonely existence can lead to bitterness, and God only knows where that goes, right? That can move in an aggressive direction quite quickly. Well, the antidote to that, as far as I'm concerned, is something like encouragement. Is partly why I'm so appalled by the characterization of our society as essentially as both symbolically and literally as a tyrannical patriarchy. You know, that the criticism that emerges on the left is essentially that hierarchies are predicated on power, and power is equated to tyranny, and then so social structure itself is equated to tyranny. And
Now, as a soy cuck, commie cultural Marxist, I have to chime in here and say that this is itself a misrepresentation of how many of us think about hierarchies. It's not that, most of us are not, anarchists or, even communists that think that, there should be no hierarchies at all, but it's just questioning the hierarchies which we live in and understanding which ones are actually based, like which ones are ones that are being forced, and which ones have, actually come down to merit, or actually come down to who is, most deserving to be in a particular place. He was saying that he doesn't like the way in which, our society is framed as being, a tyrannical, patriarchal one. But at the end of the day, it is. Patriarchy just means that, saying men are ruling, and overwhelmingly most domains of life, in most societies around the world, human societies, men overwhelmingly rule the homes, rule business, make the laws and everything. And, so much of, Peterson's whole message and his whole, journey and influence has been about channeling that anger that he's referring to, that resentment that a lot of people have, for the downturns in the economy and, different types of social alienation, and saying that it is basically that it's not your fault. It's the fault of, the PC police. It's the fault of all these cultural Marxists. It's the fault of, these super progressives, the super woke and whatnot, cancel culture. And yeah, there are plenty of people that are obnoxious in the left wing and progressive sphere. But overall, the issues that they're taking are really getting at the heart at this system, in that, a lot of bigotry mixed with a lot of laissez-faire capitalism has fucked us all. You know what I'm saying? And it would be a lot easier for us to be able to focus our energies, on taking down, those people who hold the power. But you have figures like him who are telling you, like, no, it's these smaller groups and everything. They want to control you. They want to, stifle your free speech, when that's not the case. And of course he's not going to, take responsibility for that, especially because, unlike Ben Shapiro, no mass murderers have claimed that they were inspired by him. But he has become a lightning rod for these beliefs that, no, it isn't something that's wrong within me. It is something that's wrong with the world. And, you know what I'm saying, we need to stand firm in changes against the world. You know, sometimes you do need to stand in the face of certain changes in society, but the reasons that he gives, you know, for these are just not, you know, they're not really admirable. You know, they come from a place of hatred and spite and just being stuck in one's ways.
That's nonsensical. It's a nonsensical oversimplification. The fundamental ruling principle of a functioning hierarchy is not power. It's something more like fatherhood. It's something more like encouragement and reciprocity and reciprocity and courage and productivity and generosity, all of those things. And I was talking to Jocko Willink a couple of weeks ago, and he's a very assertive and man, very much capable of physical aggression, built for it, and both physically and temperamentally. And he went through the Naval SEAL training, and that's a prime example of a patriarchal hierarchy, let's say.
Sure.
But what they were taught most fundamentally was that each of them had their buddy's back.
Right.
Like they were taught reciprocity.
Right. So
And
I think
functional higher.
part of my
okay, so-
generation's issue
yeah.
with that characterization, and I've listened to a lot of your work on hierarchies, and I agree with a great deal of it. But part of it is when we see so many of the institutions that we grew up with, the Catholic Church, the government, we look at a lot of the wars that we've been in that we now find out were foolhardy, and the reasons we got into them were not initially the reasons we were told. When we look at, mega corporations and the things that they get away with, whether it's, these massive fraud, examples of fraud, when we look at the dishonesty that is inherently, seemingly baked into not only the system, but human beings, as you say, it's not necessarily capitalism, it's deeper than that. But when you say that hierarchies are more fatherhood or based on generosity or cooperation, my generation is looking at so many of the institutions that we have seen literally have been rotted out from dishonest, malevolent, bad actors and bad forces that seemingly are not really checked and seem to run amok and are not counterbalanced by that generosity or that encouragement that you talk about. So that seems to be, when I hear a lot of what you talk about, so much of it resonates with me, but some of it is hard to grasp because it is very positive and very hopeful view of hierarchies. But in light of all of the nefarious people and their ability to poison organizations, do you not ever look at some of those statements about hierarchies and say that, like, yes, hierarchies can get poisoned?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah.
I mean, look, there are a couple of observations there. When hierarchies degenerate, it's because of power and deceit. And they do degenerate. And a degenerative hierarchy is full of lies and power games. But I'm not characterizing hierarchies as based on, let's say, productivity and reciprocity. I'm characterizing functional hierarchies as characterized by productivity and reciprocity. See, the essential claim on the radical left is that the hierarchical structure per se is tyrannical and predicated on power, and that's simply not true. Now, when the structures degenerate...
No, this is incorrect. This is not what we assume. There are some idiots who just go out there and they just say whatever comes to mind, or they've learned some slogans. But no, but anybody who actually has thought, about this, again, it is about challenging, really just looking out and being like, is this hierarchy actually rewarding those whom deserve to be there? Or is it just placing people there because of, grift or this degeneracy that he's referring to? And, again, trying to be Weasley with it and saying that, like, oh, well, power disruption, blah, blah, blah. Hierarchy is inherently about certain people having more influence, getting more rewards than other people, but also taking on, more risk. It's inherently about, imbalances of power and responsibility. And that is not in and of itself what left-wingers and progressives are about, but who is allowed in there, why, and why is it that, you know what I'm saying, when the people decide they want things to go a certain way, that it is okay for those, you know what I'm saying, the powers that be to move in the opposite direction. Yeah.
That's how they degenerate. And it's definitely the case that we have to keep our eyes open for that occurrence, that we should be appalled by it, and that we should strive to do everything we possibly can to stop it. But my sense of that is that starts with you. You want to stop deceit in the world, then stop lying.
Right.
If you want to stop the arbitrary exercise of power, then stop using it. Now, let me give you an example of this.
That's hilarious. This is like when Hillary Clinton was saying that shit, what the fuck was she saying? This is basically like every goofball that, you know, will say to somebody like, oh, all you gotta do is just tell those drug dealers or tell those murderers or tell those rapists, hey, stop doing it. Stop doing it. I told you to stop. It was Hillary Clinton that said that, like, oh, we went to, you know, Vladimir, we went to somebody else, and we said, hey, what are you doing? You're being real ornery right now. Stop doing that. Stop throwing your toys around the room. This is so goofy. This dude is a goofball. He's saying that, like, oh, this basically goes back to his whole, you know, clean your own room thing. As in, if you don't want to see this stuff happening in the world, then you should get your own house or your own room in order. But again, motherfucker, what do you do then if the other powers that be, if you're in an organization or whatever, and you're trying to uphold the rule of law, and you're not lying, you're not being deceitful, but the other people are corralling themselves to do exactly that. All right, and possibly get you out of the organization because you're not willing to go with the grift. He doesn't have a proper way of detailing that. His whole thing is that, hey, if you don't want to stop this stuff, it starts with you and being a benevolent being, and that will inevitably just take care of itself somehow. It's nonsense. Diversity strategic plan. Oh, I already know what this is. Diversity, equity, and inclusion. A strategic plan implementation provided many DEI initiatives, yada, 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 progress report, annual DEI summit, and whatnot. So the thing is, this is not, I'm glad that you sent me this, and I will go over this. I'm going to go use the restroom real quick. But diversity, equity, and inclusion, those are, as it says here, a strategic planning on how to better serve, you know what I'm saying, in this case, the alumni of a major university. And you learn about the annual inclusion summit, information and guidance, campus progress report, tracking unit. Which one of these is specifically like annual progress? Oh, okay. And it says here there's 2,500 action items and 50. Damn it, hold on. So you're saying that this, hope you enjoy your bread, hope your bread comes out well. So you said that this is an example of racism couched as affirmative action. Well, interesting. No, diversity, equity, and inclusion is, in its name, it is about making, you know, different alumni more representative of the people who are actually trying to participate in these groups. It's not just going and grabbing a people who are undeserving of these positions, but finding people who otherwise wouldn't be included in these opportunities and giving them a chance to be represented in them. And affirmative action isn't nearly as complex or detailed as this. Our unit-based strategic objectives and action items documented provides a summary report on more than 2,500 action items of the 50 plans developed by individual school, college, and campus units. So this can't even just be pinned as, you know, saying one particular group having oversized influence in a particular space. This has been an initiatives that have been taken on by a multitude of different groups in different places in the hierarchy, and making a coordinated effort to bring these goals about. This is not racism. Racism is about exclusion. And you can't say that, oh, an effort to make groups more diverse or making alumni more diverse, representative of the real population, and giving more people opportunities, that's not racism. That's spreading the wealth. That's literally spreading the resources. That's the complete opposite of racism. But like I said, I'm glad that you shared that with me. And I'm going to go use the bathroom real quick. But in the meantime, I'm also going to show again the comments that Jordan Peterson made about the Bill C-16 concerning trans rights and how he was defending it back in 2016 and the way that he still feels about it today. And I'll be back from using the restroom.
And are you prepared to suffer the consequences that society may deem you need to suffer because of your views?
Yes, I'm prepared to do that. Well, so what am I willing to do? Well, I think that the Ontario Human Rights Tribunal is probably obligated by their own tangled web to bring me in front of it. If they find me, I won't pay it. If they put me in jail, I'll go on a hunger strike. I'm not doing this. And that's that. I'm not using the words that other people require me to use, especially if they're made up by radical left-wing ideologues. Now, if our society comes to some sort of consensus over the next while about how we'll solve the pronoun problem, let's call it, and that becomes part of popular parlance, and it seems to solve the problem properly without sacrificing the distinction between singular and plural, and without requiring me to memorize an impossible list of an indefinite number of pronouns, then I would be willing to reconsider my position. But I'm also partly opposed to this because it's been made mandatory and has the whole weight of the law behind it. It's like, this is a very bad idea. I believe this is a very bad idea. And I believe that the reason this has caused so much noise, tremendous amount of noise, tremendous amount of attention on YouTube, is because there are things that are at stake in this discussion, despite its surface nature, that strike at the very heart of our civilization. That's what I believe.
Alrighty, let's get back. All right. All right, back to our regularly scheduled program.
I mean, because I'm sensitive to the criticisms that you just laid out and the reasons that young people might be cynical about the institutions, the institutions that make up our culture. And there's no doubt they have the proclivity to degenerate, as I talk about in chapter 11. Yeah. That's the evil, that's the tyrannical
and
king.
And I just before, because you're going to have a great answer for this. Yes. But like the other thing is when you say it starts with you, and to a degree that's true. But it's hard for a guy like me to believe. For example, when I was in community college, the CIA was running a labyrinth of secret prisons that we all later found out about. So it's hard for me to kind of make the connection. Well, if I do my homework, the CIA is going to stop running the torture prison. Like, that's the disconnect, I feel like, with some of the personal responsibility, that it does have a limit where it's like, I can be very honest. How is that going to stop incredibly powerful people?
How many people are we talking to, you and me, right now?
500,000 easily. Okay,
so, and you were in community college how long ago?
Good question. I was there I went back like a real loser, but I graduated high school in 2003, so let's say this was around 2004 or 5.
Okay, so it's 15 years, roughly speaking.
Yes.
Okay, so you've gone from that guy 15 years ago to someone who's speaking on a regular basis with 500,000 people.
That is correct.
So everything you say matters.
Well,
and you shaped your character back when you were in college. Look, you have power, plenty of it. And, people are watching you on YouTube, and they're watching how you say things and what you say and what questions you ask and all of that. And so you have more influence than you think. And
well,
now
flattery will get you everywhere. You are.
Well,
you're right about everything. I fold.
When you can talk to 500,000 people on a regular basis, then you have influence, and God only knows how much. And you're a comedian as well, and so you can say things that are funny, and funny things are often true. One of the characteristics of comedians is to say true things and that people don't expect, and everyone cracks up about it.
Some of them are true, and we'll see. Some of them we don't know that they're true at the time, and then months later, someone goes to jail and they are true. But
I've observed when institutions become corrupted that there's someone heading the show, generally speaking, there's individuals who are acting in a corrupt way. They're lying often, and they're dominating inappropriately. And the reason I picked the individual as the focus of my attention was because I thought that was the place where the proclivity for the corruption of social organizations could be best
Addressed.
that's where the best addressed. Well, how else could it possibly be addressed? With other institutions?
Right.
They're going to
That's a
run
fair
into the
point.
same problem, aren't they?
That's a fair point.
So, and you say there's limits to personal responsibility, and I suppose that's true, but it isn't obvious to me what those limits are. I mean, you climbed out from community college to the position of authority and influence that you have now, and God only knows what you'll be doing in 10 years, and God only knows what you could be doing in 10 years if you did everything right.
Right.
And so it isn't obvious to me at all what the limits of personal responsibility is, and I certainly believe that the spoken truth is absolutely unstoppable. And so the better you are at
Well, I
expressing...
do agree with you, but we do have, it is a little stoppable because we are on a website right now that can choose to take me off anytime they want, right? I mean, we're using YouTube right now and they can take me off. And, we are on platforms that we monetize our show, but they can kick us off too. And then, so there are things that you do run up into, you hit walls, I think. And I think personal responsibility is great. I think it's important. I think it's essential for people to live good lives. But there's a lot of seemingly institutional injustice out there when it comes to the prison system in America, for example, and, private prisons, people making money, by giving kids harsher sentences in the penal system, and this has been a massive scandal. There was a documentary about it called Kids for Cash, where you have, corrupt people doing horrible things. And I'm not naive, and I don't think that you can ever eradicate anything like that. But I do feel like there is a tendency of people to say, well, I'm honest and I'm doing the right thing, but they don't hold any of those other people to account that may be doing horrible things to other people. So I think maybe...
Well, I'm definitely not suggesting ever that you stop with yourself.
Right.
You just start with yourself. It's if you look at any complex problem, you could say that it might manifest itself at multiple levels of social organization. The individual would be implicated, but then perhaps your family, perhaps your community, perhaps your whole country. You can stack up the hierarchies, the social organizations around any given problem, and then you could say, well, the problem could optimally be addressed at all of those levels of analysis simultaneously if you had the capacity. And that's the case. I would say that as you put your own life together and become more responsible and more capable and hopefully more generous and more honest, then you're going to be in much better position to properly assess what steps need to be taken in the broader social realm.
Right.
I've never suggested that people limit themselves to their room, let's say.
Right.
But for me, and this makes some sense because I am a clinical psychologist, the fundamental unit of analysis is the individual. And I would also say that's the principle upon which our culture is erected. That's the place, that's the fundamental place, is the individual. And maybe that's because individuals feel pain.
And see, it's getting very, now it's just moving to this very just kind of feely, again, using poetic flourishes and saying that this is what our entire culture is founded upon. Okay, but a society is made of individuals, right? And they move as a unit. And when numbers of people make decisions based off of certain ideas or values, that is, decisions that affect everybody in that group as well as individuals outside that group. And so when you're talking about something like corruption or abuse of power and whatnot, injustices, the only way to respond to that isn't just saying, oh, just worry about your room or just worry about, this stuff. Because the thing is, again, he likes to play around with that and saying, I never said just limit yourself to your room. But then again, saying when faced with dilemmas of like, okay, how do we improve representation for like trans people? Do you think that women and men can actually work or function in the workplace? As a matter of fact, let's bring that one up. Jordan Peterson, women in the workplace makeup. Okay, let's take a look at this, right? So this is he did on Vice a few years ago. Why women wear makeup at work, right?
Is there sexual harassment in the workplace? Yes. Should it stop? That'd be good. Will it? Well, not at the moment it won't, because we don't know what the rules are.
Do you think men and women can work in the workplace together
We don't know.
without sexual harassment?
We'll see.
We'll see. How many years will it take for men and women working in the workplace together
More than
to
40.
get a sense?
We don't know what the rules are. Like, what? Here's a rule.
Don't
How about
you-
no makeup in the workplace?
So he's saying that like, oh, we don't know what the rules are, so let me go ahead and spitball here. Let me go ahead and propose one. Don't wear makeup to work, woman. Don't do it. Because you'll be arousing me, and you should basically the argument that he's giving is this is the closest thing to an intellectual argument for they're asking for it, or even, you know, to be more crass, you can grab him by the pussy because you can, basically. And the thing is, I don't know what the hell this man is talking about. I mean, I've been learning about sexual harassment since my very first job, even before that. And they tell you specifically what the rules are and what is considered sexual harassment. If you don't agree with that shit, then you need to go find a different job. You know what I'm saying? And this is an example of there being, you know, enforcement in order to bring about justice and equality. You know what I'm saying? You know, he talks about like, oh, you know, get your own room in order and don't just stop there and blah, 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 blah. Okay, and guess what? Women and a certain number of men up and down the hierarchies and just society at large have decided, you know what? You know what I'm saying? We've gotten our rooms as clean as fucking possible, but everybody else keeps shoveling their bullshit into ours and expecting us to just deal with it. Right? But they choose not to be dealing with it anymore. And somebody like him who is resentful of those changes is expressing openly what he really feels about it. He just said, what about this? We don't know what the rules of sexual harassment are. We don't know if men and women can actually work together, even though they've been doing so for thousands of years in different ways. And just for, you know, and if you just want to use the example of like, since like diversity measures, or not diversity measures, but like equality measures and civil rights and all that shit, then just, you know, within the last century and everything. But even then, this isn't even like a traditional mindset. This is just a religious fundamentalist one, like, oh, men and women cannot be around each other, or if you do, then women need to do what they can to not be arousing to men and not get too much attention from men, as opposed to men just showing fucking restraint and focusing on what they need to focus on at work.
Why would that be a rule?
Why should you wear makeup in the workplace? Isn't that sexually provocative?
No.
It's not?
No.
Well, what is it then? What's the purpose of makeup?
Some people would like to just put on makeup.
Why?
I don't know why.
Why do
people
you
put
make
on-
your lips red? Because they turn red during sexual arousal. That's why. Why do you put rouge on?
Are you sexually aroused, Jordan Peterson? Them lips is looking pretty rosy red to me.
your cheeks? Same reason.
I mean, look.
How about high heels?
What
are they for?
about high heels?
What about them? They're there to exaggerate sexual attractiveness. That's what high heels do.
We like the girls in the pump and the bump. We like the girls in the pumps with the bump. We like the girls in the pumps with the bump. We like the girls with the pumps and the bump.
Now, I'm not saying that people shouldn't use sexual displays in the workplace. I'm not saying that. But I am saying that that is what they're doing. And that is what they're doing.
Do you feel like a serious woman who does not want sexual harassment in the workplace, do you feel like if she wears makeup in the workplace that she is somewhat being critical?
Yeah,
Okay.
I do think that.
And the dude at the end, it doesn't sound, it kind of cut off a little bit, but he says, do you think they're being hypocritical? Basically, he's like, oh, do you think they're being hypocritical? Do you think they're being hypocritical if women wear makeup and then they get, you know, sexually harassed? It's basically like, what do you expect when you go out dressed like that? Or they were asking for it. You know what I'm saying? What do you expect? You expect men to behave themselves and not, you know what I'm saying, harass you while you're at work and everything just because you decided to put on makeup or you happen to be especially attractive? Sounds like you just like to hear himself talk. It's not just that. He has a particular philosophy that he's found a way to make himself rich off of it, but also tap into the anger that a lot of people, the resentment that a lot of people feel from these changes, these advances in society being made. I can't believe people actually know what he speaks about, but you know what? Not surprised at all. True. Yeah, I mean, the thing is, that's what they feel. They'll never say it. They'll try to, you know, dance around it. Kind of like the people, kind of like that person that was in here a little while ago and was trying to tell me that oh, you know, he's not against trans people. You know, the stuff that they call progressive is when you actually examine it, it's just racism and sexism, but it's couched as affirmative action. And then I get them to actually show me an example, and they bring up the exact opposite of racism and sexism is about being more inclusionary and bringing more people to the fold whom otherwise wouldn't have these opportunities because they would either not know about them or they would be excluded from them from biases from other people or just not being within, saying consideration. But no, that's why the term reactionary, why we use the term reactionary in certain circles, because they're reacting against specifically progressive, left-wing, and or just liberal initiatives in society, which are usually about giving more rights and liberties to marginalized groups. But that's what he is. They'll never come out and just outright say that because they know how it will come off. But that is exactly what they are. And that's what he is. And he is just one that happens to be, you think he's bad, he's considered one of the most sophisticated speakers on these, like, propagators of these values. He's considered like the intellectual, the philosopher, the narrator, right? Like, for real. Around the world, not just in the US, but around the fucking world.
Right.
That's where the reality is, and the rest of it's abstraction. Not that it isn't important or relevant, it is.
People are doing a lot of business online now. ShipStation allows you to create an infrastructure that works for your business in terms of shipping. They allow you to worry about growing your business in other ways while they handle all of the shipping. They import orders from any sales channel, ship with any carrier, access discounted shipping rates, automate just about any shipping task. No matter what you're selling, Amazon, Etsy, your own website, ShipStation funnels all your orders into a simple interface. What's amazing is 2 months free, no hassle, stress-free shipping. 60 days of free trial. ShipStation.com. Click on the microphone at the top of the page and type in Tim Dillon. If you have a business, it's so important to keep costs low. So 2 months of a free shipping is great. The code is Tim Dillon, the offer code. That's ShipStation.com. Enter offer code Tim Dillon. I'm telling you, you're going to love it. It'll definitely enable you to really take your business to the next level with ShipStation. ShipStation.com. Enter offer code TIMDILLON, Tim Dillon, to access a 2-month free trial. And it's great. Small businesses can now access the same rates that are usually reserved for Fortune 500 companies without any of the contracts or commitments. So that's ShipStation.com, promo code Tim Dillon. You got to keep your data private when you go online. You got to go to ExpressVPN. Hundreds of data brokers are out there whose sole business it is to buy and sell your data. One of these data points is your IP address. Data harvesters use your IP to uniquely identify you and your location. But with ExpressVPN, your connection gets recruited through an encrypted server, and my IP address is masked. Every time I turn on ExpressVPN, I give the IP address is random. So they don't know where you are, what you're doing. It's important. Everybody's trying to sell your data. It's very late. Everyone's trying to sell your data. Not good. But what you can do is use a VPN. Ren uses it, right?
Yes.
Because the government's always after you.
Always.
Ben's whole thing now is Signal. Talk about Signal with everyone. Do you use Signal? Should I be using Signal?
Whitney Webb said it's good.
Yep, I'm sure it is, man. But she's in some hut where people are trying to kill her. You're eating macaroni and cheese on a picnic table, which was phenomenal today.
Very good.
That was really the meal of the day. Much less cost. That was really the meal. It always is. La Barbecue in Austin, Texas. Go to ExpressVPN and order La Barbecue.
You could.
You could.
Yeah.
Of course you can. You don't want people knowing what you're ordering. No matter what device you're on, phone, laptop, or smart TV, all you have to do is tap one button, you get protected. So if you're like me and you believe that your data is your business, secure yourself with the #1 data-rated VPN on the market. Number one rated VPN, data-rated. You know what I'm saying. That's expressvpn.com/Tim Dillon. Go to expressvpn.com/Tim Dillon to learn more. When you look at, the emerging forces in society that are tearing it apart, what are the biggest ones to you in your mind?
Well, certainly ideological possession plays a huge role. And I suppose to some degree that's probably misplaced spirituality. It's something like that. And so I've always been struck by Nietzsche and Dostoevsky's analysis of the pathology of the West, that we're still suffering the cataclysmic consequences of losing our religious grounding. You need some conceptual scheme at the highest level of philosophical generalization. You need some.
And here we go with the religious fundamentalism and the full, really where it all leads back to, and where a lot of it comes back to, is he fundamentally hates the fact that society has become so secularized that as there have been these challenges to religion and the idea of, not necessarily gods, because there's still plenty of people who believe in deities but don't believe in the institutions and these fundamental hierarchies. Well, so much of our society in turn has been influenced by them: education, business, different elements of culture, and expression and everything. And so as a result of those challenges being made, especially during the time of Enlightenment, when there were a lot of when there was a huge leap forward in technology, in sciences, in philosophy, in culture, and the way that people were able to organize and interact with one another, it set a whole new precedent that we are still living in. And he is one of the people who is deep down really resentful of that. And that's why to him everything has to come back down to a fundamental truth of religion. Because for him, without religion, there is no moral foundation, there is no framework. Everything just becomes a mess, in spite of the fact that there's plenty of examples of people living secularized lives and being just as productive, happy, fulfilled, and cohesive, and sometimes even more so in places that have less religion or that are more secularized.
Some way of answering what is good and what is evil, and some way of answering what's the purpose of my life, and maybe what's the purpose of existence. And at that level of analysis, the only answers are religious. Now, you can debate the rational acceptability of those answers, but that doesn't matter. I'm talking about...
It doesn't matter? Then what are we talking about here? If you want to say that, like, oh, you cannot, how else could you understand not to murder, not to rape, not to steal? There are plenty of secular arguments for that. Well, first of all, there's reputation. Even if you're just cynical and you really don't care about the harm that you're doing to others, you don't want to be known as the person who is committing all these acts, because they're usually, for the most part, they're seen as extremely negative behaviors, and you will be killed or I won't say killed or executed, the same thing, or you will be exiled or jailed or killed or left for dead. Those are perfectly rational arguments, but also you have to figure, oh, why wouldn't I want to do these things? Because you also never know who is going to be in power tomorrow. And so you maybe inflict a lot of pain thinking that, oh, nothing is going to happen to you, or that this, you never know when who is going to have the upper hand in this situation. And you could find yourself in a place where you are the would-be victim, and you would be grateful for the empathy and for the sympathy that comes from another person. You don't have to believe in an afterlife for that. You don't have to believe in any sort of religious text for that, or even have a sense of spirituality. But for him, they are inherently intertwined, and they can't be separated, because, again, he is a dogmatic person. He can only think in this very narrow framework.
The level of analysis problem, right, essentially. If you're talking about such things, you're in the religious domain. Well, intact cultures, let's say, or traditional cultures, have a structure of ritual and myth and dance and music and art and story that frames that uppermost domain of conceptualization, and people live within that. When it's fragmented and shattered, as ours has been, people turn to substitutes, and those substitutes have all too frequently been well, either a cataclysmic loss of faith in existence itself, which is a nihilism that has terrible psychological and social consequences, or the elevation of an ideological position to the status of a religious belief. And that's not good. And so everything in its proper place, you render unto Caesar what is Caesar's and unto God what is God's. And, the rationalist objector will say, well, there's nothing that's God's. And I would respond to that by saying, be careful what you presume.
Right.
Because something has to act there. Something has to exist there. And you fall into a religious story. So if with the critique you laid out, for example, of social institutions, you say, well, they tend towards corruption. And maybe they're so corrupt that only a fool would have faith in them. And that's a powerful argument. But it's essentially a religious argument. What it does is it takes the problem of evil. So it assumes that there's evil, which is the corruption and the power. Maybe you don't use the term evil, but it doesn't matter. It's still what you're referring to. And then it places it in social institutions. It says the problem of evil is located in the social institution. Well, that's a religious claim. It's also a faulty religious claim, and it'll twist you up and bend you around because it's incomplete.
How is it incomplete? How is it incomplete? There's a great example. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and pull this one up. So he just said that these social institutions leave you with a sense of, what did he say? He said they make you incomplete. Let's go back and just see what he said.
A religious argument. What it does is it takes the problem of evil. So it assumes that there's evil, which is the corruption and the power. Maybe you don't use the term evil, but it doesn't matter. It's still what you're referring to. And then it places it in social institutions. It says the problem of evil is located in the social institution. Well, that's a religious claim. It's also a faulty religious claim, and it'll twist you up and bend you around because it's incomplete.
And who is it for him to say who is incomplete in their religious or irreligious beliefs? And what is he to say which beliefs are the correct ones to have and which ones aren't? This dude's full of malarkey. He's just finding any way to try to justify his own narrow, esoteric, and antiquated views. And here's the other great thing about what he's saying is that he's all like, oh, well, left, they want to make it all about the institutions and everything. No, we recognize that institutions have the ability. We have the ability to use institutions in order to make some grand sweeping changes top down in society. Which one did he say? He's not saying a particular religion. But the thing is, what he's alluding to specifically is what they like to call Judeo-Christian beliefs, or really just Western, this mythos of Western civilization. No, not religion in and of itself. He's speaking specifically about Christianity, about what they refer to as Judeo-Christian beliefs, which is this hodgepodge. We're not assuming anything. This is from the track record of him speaking on these issues before, and also stuff that he said that he's going to continue to say in this podcast. He doesn't just outright say, oh, I am a Christian man, or I am a, follower in this stuff. But it's in all the stuff that he's alluding. He's full on with the patriarchy. He's full on with specific hierarchies. He doesn't like so much, even though he frames himself as being an intellectual, he really doesn't like a lot of intellectualism, especially when it's attached to secular means. So we're not assuming anything. And as a matter of fact, for a quick example of how he gets this whole thing wrong in reference to, we just look at institutions as being, as we just look at institutions as just being there and evil, and that's a faulty idea. No, it's not a faulty idea, because those are actually great ways of being able to implement sweeping changes in society, as will be demonstrated here by the comedian Jim Jeffries.
Making people bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Making them do it?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a very good idea.
But Making people bake a cake for a gay wedding.
Making them do it?
Yeah.
I don't think that's a very good idea.
But here's the argument. So should they be able to deny making a cake for a black couple if they don't like black people?
Allowed to? Probably. That doesn't mean it's right.
Okay, so then we had the civil rights movement where they said black people, you had to serve them in your restaurants and stuff like that, and it did work and it did make our society better, but would you argue that that still wasn't right?
No, that was right.
Why is that different to now if you didn't want to make a cake for black people?
Maybe it's not. Maybe it's not different.
Yeah.
Maybe I was wrong about that.
Simple as that. We're not assuming anything. He was, for in that short amount of time, he went from no, I don't think you should have to make a cake, for gay people, which is effectively an argument about, saying should we use our institutions? He mentioned Judeo-Christians. No, he didn't. But again, it's not about explicitly what he's saying here. It's about, again, what he said in other platforms and other interviews, and also what he's alluding to here. Because Jordan Peterson, he's not like a Buddhist. He's not even a Catholic. But in all the beliefs that he espouses, what he overwhelmingly ends up referring to is, again, this hodgepodge. They like to throw around the term, the Judeo-Christian is less of something that will be somebody will call themselves, and more so refers to a hodgepodge of different beliefs and philosophies that they think are pertaining specifically to their idea of Western civilization, because they tend to associate Judaism and Christianity with being explicitly about cultural and social norms attributed to Western civilization. But no, he's not mentioning that. He's not going to explicitly mention that. But who can claim that what he is alluding to? I mean, this is getting boring. Twitch 69, LOL 420. I mean, it's obvious you're just bullshitting. But the thing is, I get it that you're here just to waste space and everything, which is whatever. So I'm going to just ignore you and keep on going on with the video. If you wanted to know more about this, then you could, but you're clearly not interested in that. So I'm moving on.
And I tried to detail that to a large degree in chapter 11 when I talked about, because you can find malevolence in your own soul. You can find malevolence in other individuals. You can find it in the social order. And you can find something that looks like malevolence or certainly feels like it in the natural world.
Right.
And if you only focus on one of those, then, well, it's very convenient for you.
Damn it.
I mean, so one of the things I always wonder, for example, if you locate evil in the social world, let's say in the institutional world, in the patriarchal tyranny, well, then you found an enemy, right? And then you found a target for all of your unexamined spite and resentment and cruelty and homicidal tendencies, all of that. It's very dangerous. And this more sophisticated observers, and I think you can make this case merely as a consequence of observing literature, as more sophisticated observers place the battle between good and evil inside the human soul. And then it manifests itself in social institutions as well, but that's not the primary locale of the divine battle.
Right.
And
Christopher Hitchens, the late, great, writer, had argued, in a polemic, God is not great, that religion should be replaced by the canon of literature, that theology should be thrown away and replaced with literature, that all of our great lessons that we need to know are in literature. Do you find fault with that?
well, the deepest literature is religious.
Okay.
I mean, that's what Hitchens didn't realize, is that if you took 100 great books and sifted them so that you derived one greatest book from it, then you'd have a religious text.
Right.
No. Most of our stories do not have to do, even though they might be inspired by religion, they are not have to do with religious beliefs. Literature, depending on which branch of literature, which time period, talks about, relationships, talks about, power struggles, talks about, the anxieties of growing up and, noticing changes within yourself and within, outside of yourself. It could just be about documenting, world-changing events, monumental events. This boiling down of everything of importance to being what he cherishes most, and yet framing it as being what everybody is actually alluding to. Like he ascribed, like you heard him, is that he ascribed to Hitchens, who was a very well-spoken and outspoken atheist and non-believer and had great arguments for secularism and against religion. He is ascribing to him that, he actually was religious and he just didn't understand the truth of what he was getting at. No, he is trying to basically force his own beliefs and grift them and what's the term I'm trying to look? He's trying to not grift, but graft the beliefs of somebody else. And because they're not around to defend themselves, they're saying that, no, they're actually reinforcing my beliefs. They're actually reinforcing things I say instead of just saying that this is what I want to see within them. He is framing them as being some general truth about human existence. This is deceit. This is manipulation. This is, he's really putting his psychology skills to use here, but it's mixed in with his own dogma and his own preferences. And he's so blinded by his need to see things in this way, or maybe he does recognize this, but this is just, he's just been really successful in selling this. So why stop now? But you cannot ascribe, saying your own beliefs and say that, well, since there are some things which you're alluding to, which fall in line with my beliefs, instead of just recognizing those may be overlapping values that come from two different, paths towards reaching the same goal. I'm going to say that actually we have the same core beliefs and you just don't recognize what the truth is. That's religious fundamentalism. That's dogma.
And it would deal with these high order concerns that we just described. And some of that can't be done rationally, which is partly why Hitchens would locate it in literature. But it's not just literature. It's also located and expressed in architecture. A cathedral says something about the structure of being. Now, what it says, you can't exactly say. That's why there's a cathedral instead of a description of a cathedral.
Right.
It's the same with music and perhaps particularly religious music, but secular music is religious music. It's just been secularized. It still has the same impact and the same message.
A lot of religions seem to be less relevant to people because a lot of not all of their lessons and morals, which many of them are great, but a lot of them, the big three, let's take, which you have Christianity, Judaism, and Islam. Christianity went through a pretty serious reformation. Judaism is a small religion in terms of the numbers of people. Islam is potentially going through a reformation now in certain countries and other, it's politically. So when people look at these religions and we say the answers are to be found there, there's sort of a deep skepticism amongst a lot of people who look at, when people were following these religions to the letter of the law and when they had an omnipresent, force in the political structure of society, it was often quite an oppressive place, whether it was, if you look at the Catholic Inquisition or whether you look at, modern day Saudi Arabia, for example. So there's a skepticism about those belief systems being incredibly relevant now. And then you arrive at this place where people start believing in, that they're, an other kin on Tumblr or whatever nonsense that you've had to go up against for the last 4 years. So it's like, what can you create or what can we put in that? Because if people, for example, if you were raised a fundamentalist Christian and you don't feel for whatever reason that belief system suits you anymore, and you are out there and you are looking for belief and you are looking for meaning and you're not going to find it, and who knows why that belief system doesn't suit you? I don't know. It could be your identity, it doesn't work. It could be that your family and you had something. It could have been that the particular church you were in was abusive. I know many Catholics who've left the church because of the litany of abuses, right, that has happened. So what can we create, or how do we create some type of, and I'm not saying that we have to do it or it has to be a group project. I loathe groups, and I love your focus on the individual in that sense is what makes you unique and interesting in the individuals. George Carlin had a great quote. He goes, I hate people, I love individuals. It was something to that degree. But, I agree wholeheartedly that what you see on the left right now is a lot of people that are indoctrinating themselves into a new religion that is as oppressive as unforgiving and as detrimental as a lot of the tenets of old religion. But what can you do if you say, you know, I don't want to be a part of that, but I also don't want to be a part of, you know, sort of that, you know, archaic, superstitious kind of, you know, belief system that you may have grown up with.
That's what we're all trying to work out, isn't it? Is what we should do. I mean, your comments about Hitchens are very interesting to me, because I would say in the main I've taken his words seriously.
Right.
Is that I do believe that the truth of the biblical truth, for example, is a literary truth. It's not a scientific truth.
Right.
Science isn't about morality. It's about something else. Whatever the Bible is about, it's about morality. Now, you can debate the moral lessons in the Bible, but the Bible is an extraordinarily complicated book, so it's not that clear exactly what the lessons are, let's say. But having said all that, I've adopted a psychological / literary approach to ethical truth. And I've learned a lot about Christianity, for example, as a consequence. So, and a lot of that was from reading Carl Jung, who wrote a lot of what he wrote in response to Nietzsche's observation that religion was dead, that God was dead. Yes. And so Jung was influenced by Freud, but at least as much by Nietzsche, and he was trying to solve the problems that Nietzsche left. Well, you could, by definition, Christ is the perfect man. Okay, by definition.
Right.
Now, you can debate his representation in Christianity.
How about we just debate if the man existed? How about we start with that before we go and start saying that, like, well, he was the best, he was the most perfect man that ever existed. Maybe as a literary device. But even then, that's disputable, because it's like, what values are you actually most concerned with? Yeah, as a literary figure, Jesus Christ could be seen as a great man, but that was only one set of conditions in one's location. Or not one location, but it was a set of conditions in which he supposedly, existed. Every era, every time, every place in history, every country deserves its own kind of heroes. You get the hero you deserve, not the one in which you just fantasize about. You don't all get this one narrow prescription in which everybody is supposed to aspire to, and if you fall short of that, then, I'm saying, oh, well, fuck all that noise.
That isn't what I...
And to the one that was alluding to earlier, who I put on timeout, he's saying explicitly now, Christianity, and he is saying specifically Protestantism, because of the emphasis that he is putting on the figure of Jesus Christ.
I mean, in some sense, this. Each of us has a relationship, whether we like it or not, with the ideal. No matter how obscure and unarticulate that relationship is, you know that because your own conscience will torture you. And the reason it tortures you is because you fall short of your ideal. It's there in you. Now, you have a responsibility. It's pretty much the nature of responsibility to manifest yourself in accordance with that ideal. There's no escape from that. Now, what we try to do collectively is to represent that ideal and to come to some agreement about what it is, so that we can organize ourselves cooperatively and in productive peace. But there's no escaping from that internal dialogue with the ideal. Every goal you have is a reflection of that ideal. Every aim you have, every belief in something worthwhile, all your conceptions that there is such a thing as truth, or your conceptions that there are good ways of acting and evil ways of acting, all of that presupposes an implicit ideal. Part of what our religious structures have done was focus on Christianity, is to try to make that implicit ideal explicit, to represent it, so that we can understand it more and more deeply, and so that we can also live out its dictates, let's say, more consciously. And we're always doing this, whether we know it or not. So, for example, you and I, to the degree that we're able to have this conversation in a manner that is genuinely reflective of a seeking of the truth, then we're manifesting a religious ideal in the context of the conversation. And that's why we're interested in it. And that's why other people are watching it.
Right.
And they don't have to know that. And they'll say, that was meaningful. That struck me. I learned something. You know, I thought I'd watch for 5 minutes, but I watched for an hour.
Right.
We can't help it. This grips us. So, for example, you'll find yourself respecting or disrespecting people. Spontaneously, you'll find yourself in awe of someone or not, or contemptuous of them. All of that means that you're in the grip of a moral evaluation that's related to this implicit ideal. And, you know, the more I've looked at the representation of that implicit ideal in religious texts, let's say, but in the broader religious culture, the more I'm struck by its profundity. So, for example, I use this story quite frequently, but the story of Cain and Abel in Genesis is very, very short. It's only half a paragraph long. It's very, very short. But it lays out very clearly the dichotomy of personality that exists inside the human soul. There's part of us, that part that's represented by Abel, that is striving towards the light, that's attempting to serve our own interests and the interests of the broader community, and perhaps the divine interest to the best of our ability, believing it intrinsically in the basic goodness of existence. And there's another part of us that's rendered cynical and bitter and murderous by the tragedy of life and our sequential catastrophic failures and inability to put ourselves together and cruelty of the world. And that's humanity. We're all of us are caught in the battle between those two opposing viewpoints. It's religious to the core. And when we lose Christianity, let's say, we lose thousands of years of the attempt to make that implicit reality explicit. And that's a catastrophe. Sure. Now, we replace it quite quickly. We replace it with the Avengers universe, you know, where we watch the battle between good and evil being played out in movies that cost hundreds of millions of dollars to make and that push our computational resources to the limit. Think about that, you know. The most sophisticated computational devices on Earth are used to generate artificial realities where we can explore the battle between good and evil. And then we line up and pay, you know, inordinate amounts of money to expose ourselves to this. And we find it gripping. Now, we write it off as entertainment. I don't write it off as entertainment. I take it seriously.
Right.
It's a serious business.
I think the real conflict comes into, you know, what the ideal is. And
of course,
that's where the real meat of the problem lies, right? And that to agree on that and to agree on the steps to perfecting yourself into that is where you're going to find a lot of the discord, which I know you know.
Of course.
I know that you know you've waded into those waters, and they're I love everything you say about groups. I loathe groups. I don't know why. I do. It is something that I was born with a natural aversion to group think, and I'm not that I can't be caught up in it like every other human being can, and I'm sure people, I can see the YouTube comments already. What does he think you know? But I just don't. You know, I'm a gay person, for example, but I find the gay movement completely insane. I don't think they represent me. I think a lot of the things that they want are absurd, and I've been vocal about, you know, giving hormones to children that are you know, questioning their gender identity. I think is ludicrous. I think is abusive. I've said that. I've said that the moralizing and the making people like you and the making them love you and the idea that they need to conform to your belief system, to me, is I've had no interest in that. I have no interest in spending my time on this planet getting people to think I'm a worthwhile human being. And maybe that's because I'm an addict. So as an addict, I can't entertain other people's ideas of me too much, because then they become resentments, and those resentments lead me back to addiction. So I have to just do what I do, and I've attracted an audience based on the fact that they know that I don't care that much, because I can't care. It's not that I'm morally superior. If I'm to stay sober and to stay effective, I can't entertain people's ideas about me too much. I can make sure that I'm
Why
being
is
effective.
that linked? Why is that linked to your ability to stay away from addictive substances?
Because
do you know
the resentments that I will build up? You know, there's a great line, and
I see.
Yeah, the resentments. You know, basically.
So if you so think about that.
Yeah.
So if you deviate from your inbuilt sense of ethics,
Right.
then the consequences of that will be so catastrophic that you have to drug yourself into
Correct.
into insensate existence.
Correct.
Right. Well, that's
Yes.
exactly what I mean about the depth of the moral impulse.
Right.
You violate it at your peril.
Yes.
And you talk about agreement. Like, there are things we pretty broadly agree on,
Sure.
I would say.
I'm sure.
Well, virtually no one thinks it's a good idea to teach your child to lie.
Right.
So we have a pretty deep respect for the truth. Now,
Right.
we may quibble about when it's okay to bend it,
Right.
but generally speaking, we all respect and admire honesty and presume it and attempt to live in a relatively honest manner. Now, I know there are exceptions.
There are some very
There's
successful
exceptions
ones.
to everything. Well, my experience has been that
You don't think that, like,
success,
in the way our society is set
Go
up,
ahead.
we're kind of we tolerate a certain level of dishonesty. Everything from the television shows we watch to our political system, we kind of expect on some level that the people that are in front of us are not necessarily. This is why I think you, by the way, have taken off so dramatically, because the things you were saying you believe. I can tell that. And the people that are watching this can tell that, whether they agree with you or not. I think when you watch how staged and manufactured American culture is, media culture, entertainment culture, political culture, we have all become a little cynical, and we all expect a healthy dose of deceit with most culture that we get. And that's why I think people like yourself have broken through that. Academic culture, I believe, as you said, many people are afraid to say publicly what they need to say or what they have said privately, and I experienced this in my business too. So while I think the ideal is honesty would be great, I do believe we've been conditioned to expect far less honesty than we should have.
Well, look, there's I have a couple of thoughts about that. The first is, while we should tolerate, on average, about as much deception from other people as we tolerate on average from ourselves, because there's no reason to assume anything other than that.
Right.
And we have to allow our institutions to move forward despite the fact that they're composed of people who, on average, are as corrupt and deceitful as we are.
Right.
So some of that's not so much cynicism as wisdom.
Okay.
And I would say that's a particularly notable feature of the American political system, because it's been made explicit by the founders of your state. They aimed to produce a system that people who were about as deceitful and unadmirable as they were wouldn't screw up too badly. That was their goal, and that was very wise.
Right.
Now, having said that, I do believe, nonetheless, that we should strive for better and that we actually want it. And one of the things I have seen that's very heartening is that now that the bandwidth limitation has been blown off video and audio communication, and the cost has been brought down to zero, essentially, people are starving for genuine conversation.
That's true.
As you know.
Yes.
You're making your living
Yes.
doing that.
100%.
And you, I mean, tell me if I'm wrong about this, but my experience with YouTube audiences and with my public lecture audiences is, but more specifically YouTube, is that this long form discussion medium brutally punishes dishonesty.
Yes.
And insincerity.
Yes. If people spend that amount of time with you, they have to know who you are, or they have to want to spend time with you, or you have to have a demonstrable skill set that they find valuable.
Yes, and the conversation has to take place in a certain way.
Correct.
You know, I'm increasingly struck by the disjunction between a standard media interview and this kind of discussion.
Right.
I mean, we didn't structure this.
Nothing.
You're not attempting to do something with me other than have an interesting conversation.
Right.
Hopefully you're asking me questions that are actually your questions. Now, if I go to a standard interview, especially if it's a television interview, then I'll be confronted with someone who's the face of the bureaucracy. And virtually none of the questions they ask have anything to do with what they're interested in. So it's there's an artificiality about it that can easily translate into manipulation
not only
and
am
deceit.
I not asking you other people's questions, I barely prepared. I've seen enough of you that I said it makes more sense for me to have a genuine conversation than to prepare questions. I said I'm just going to kind of go with the flow, which
I don't. People often offer to send me questions before a discussion like this, and I always refuse. And it's for that reason. And I think part of the reason that people enjoy this form of communication is because it has the same quality as free-form jazz. Or I mean, the same thing happens in other genres of music when the band members are jamming. It's spontaneous creation. And to the degree that we're capable of engaging in that, then we keep our audience along, that we take our audience along for the ride. And so this also relates back to your first question about the online world. I mean, I think it's an unbelievably powerful and useful method of communication. It's obviously decimating the legacy media, and for good reason. It's technologically superior and ethically superior in every way. So that's very heartening. You can have real discussions. I mean, my life right now consists of pretty much nothing but a series of genuine discussions, or they're as genuine as I can make them. And I'm always trying to learn something from whatever discussion I have. I don't go in there with a goal in mind except to
have an honest
seek as deeply as I can into the conversation.
And we appreciate doing this. We have two more questions for you. This book, by the way, Beyond Order, 12 More Rules for Life, is available everywhere right now. You should grab it and read it, and then hopefully you'll be back on a speaking tour relatively soon. And hopefully you've sat down with stupider interviewers than me. I think you have. Now, I've watched some of your interviews. I think you have. Things that you would recommend that people read if people out there want to be smarter, or they want to understand you better outside of your own books, which are obviously 12 Rules for Life and 12 More Rules for Life, and then other things you've written as well. With somebody like you, I always like you to recommend reading, because, when you're talking about Nietzsche and Jung and everything, a lot of people are not connected with that stuff in a meaningful way. So is there a way, are there things you recommend for them to read?
Well, on my website, jordanbpeterson.com, under books, I have a list of about 100 recommended books, and people are buying a lot of those books. I keep track of their sales. And if you find the ideas that I'm presenting interesting, you'll find the books in that list interesting. They'll be temperamentally suitable for you, but you'd get the equivalent of a good humanities education if you read all those books. Better, I would say. And so and they're great books. Dostoevsky, for example, if you are a fiction reader and you like exciting fiction, Dostoevsky was a master at plotting a thriller. His books are unbelievably engrossing, and they're incredibly deep.
He's very good. Have you read Chelsea Handler?
Handler? No, I haven't.
Well, I'll send you something of hers. You check her out. She's pretty good. JordanBPeterson.com. When you are doing a speaking tour, all of your dates will be up there. You can purchase the book there as well. Thank you for coming on. I know your schedule is busy, but you are making time for a lot of people, and you've done a lot of my friends' podcasts, and obviously we really appreciate it, Jordan. And I mean, I don't know that we've solved the world's problems, but we've solved the problem of people that wanted to kill an hour in a smart and enlightening way.
Well, that's something to solve in an hour, isn't it?
That is something to solve. All right. Thank you very much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, well, thanks very much for the invitation.
All right. Thank you. And tell Michaela I said hello, and I'm going to cut out sugar soon. All right.
All right.
Thank you, buddy. That. Thanks so much.
All right.
So, Tim Dillon, he can be, and he's already expressed how he grew up being very much a kind of a right-wing libertarian, being very much, seeped into that shit. But he hasn't necessarily like moved left, but definitely recognized the contradictions and the shortcomings of a lot of those beliefs in the right wing at large. He does like to play the both sides ism, but as you can hear from what Jordan, in his interview with Jordan, he wasn't trying to be pushed back too hard, but definitely pushing back when he was talking about the need for certain hierarchies and needing to boil everything down to a religious, a fundamental religious truth that people have to come to accept, and that, to ignore this is actually creating a lot of the angst and resentment and tearing at the fabric of a moral society. I think he pushed back against that in the way in which, somebody whom I think this is his first time actually interviewing him, maybe even his first time speaking with him. But it's like, you don't always want to push too hard on somebody and just be like, oh, well, you're completely wrong or blah, 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 blah. But, just showing that he does have a very strict and fundamentalist and patriarchal and very hierarchical, just a reactionary point of view on all this shit. And, yeah, I mean, I enjoyed the interview as much as I possibly could, and it's, it wasn't too contentious. It was a good way to waste an hour and some change. And Peterson is like the Trump of YouTube. To his credit, yeah, those are all the talking points and everything. I mean, Trump, he never ended up building that wall, right? There were a lot of things that Trump said he was going to do that he didn't end up doing. Because in the end, he ended up just being another brick in the wall, the cog in the machine, maybe a little more, jagged around the edges. But nevertheless, he didn't really steer that ship too well. Oh, please! You mean that he was at, dude? There was already a lot of that wall already there. A lot of that shit was not doing anything. And hell, there's plenty of videos you can go online and see people just scaling that shit like it's nothing. 600 miles of new wall. I mean, that ain't shit. And again, it's like people are hopping over that shit every day. It's not stopping anything. It's just the media are deniers. Yeah. Of course, it always comes back to the media's lying. I mean, what would it actually change about your quality of life, though? That's the real question. Or would it just be a symbol? It's just a token set piece so that way all of the people who hate immigrants and yet actually depend on them and actually depend on them to, for, many sectors in our society can't, resolve their hatred. They're steeped in hatred, basically. It was just a token set piece. It was just a fucking, what's the term? I forget what it's called, but it's just like it was a carrot on a stick to get anti-immigrant people and racists to support him. They don't cover what he did good. Oh, Ashley, don't worry about them. This is a troll. They don't really have anything to offer to the discussion. They're just they're a maggot, and they're just upset that their landlord is out and doesn't have nearly as much attention and support, and MAGA and the far right are going to have to continue on without him. But this is no different than the people who have been showing up in the feeds. There's a lot of trolls. There's a lot of a lot of maggots. They just like to come through and just, make noise and just start shit. Not really having anything to add to the discussion. It's really boring. Yeah. Oh well. Be careful, do you get time out for maggots? Maggots. Well, anyway, I think that's it for the chat. I'll be uploading this on YouTube. It's El Samboy. You can just look up It's All Relative Podcast. And yeah, that was it. That was the interview that Tim Dillon did with Jordan Peterson. We also went through a couple other clips of Jordan Peterson fleshing out his views and his values and everything, and me giving my commentary and playing that game, Luck Be a Landlord. So yeah, join me for the next stream. I don't know when it's going to be. This is only my second one, but I appreciate everybody who's participating, including the maggots and the trolls, and hope to see y'all again, because y'all do help bring in traffic and give me the attention that I'm so desperate for. So talk to y'all later. You take care of yourself too, Ashley. I'll talk to you.